The Meteorological Research Station perched on a sea cliff like a compass needle waiting for a push. Radar dishes clicked, anemometers spun, and brass-sheen sparrows flitted along catwalks, their feathers flashing in cutting sunlight. Pip kept time with the wind, his tiny compass charm tapping his leg band as he paced. Mara traced weather fronts on laminated maps with an ink-smudged beak, her feather braid tied with threads so it would not whip her face. She preferred quiet calculation and safety margins, while Pip liked bold calls and public briefings. Their methods meshed until policy debates arrived. They were frenemies in the old sense. Each dared the other to fly better, but each had a ledger of grievances. Lately, an odd question kept repeating between them like an echo in a culvert. Pip said dreams should be free, while Mara said dreams might be taxed if dreams used public bandwidth during sleep studies. The station's duty gave their argument weight because their forecasts guided evacuation routes. Long ago, a flash flood tore a mountainside castle from its foundation and sent it skating into the estuary like a toy, all because a detour stalled the convoy. The story hung in the air as a warning every time storm sirens tested. Fizz, a canary yellow mayfly with bubble goggles that slid down his face, zipped by and tried to carry a roll of paper punctuation confetti bigger than himself. He careened into a windsock, rebounded, and said at top speed that he was ready for urgent official critical careering. Pip softened. Mara sighed. They kept him because his chaos often made sense by accident, because the station's maps told the town where to turn when storms hit. It was their responsibility to stop any scheme that would trap evacuees. They liked that the town trusted brass sparrows to point arrows instead of circle people. They also knew they could not let old rivalries inside Guild use weather as camouflage for petty coups. Kern and Seraph entered with eggplant purple swagger, childhood rivals who had somehow learned to hate the same things. Kern wore an eggplant scarf like a banner and tapped a typesetter's rule against his leg, while Seraph peered through a single-lens monocle that flashed like a warning light. They had just seized the station communications office and the city's wayfinding committee in a procedural surprise vote. Their motivation was printed on Seraph's sash that read "Sans or bust," but their speeches made it worse. Kern said curved, friendly fonts made people more agreeable to authority, and Seraph said Comic Sans proved the perfect instrument of control because nobody took themselves seriously while obeying it. They planned to force everyone to use Comic Sans on every sign, memo, and map to soften resistance. The mechanics of their plan were smugly simple, which made Pip furious. They would reroute every arterial road into a roundabout and ensure each exit had identical Comic Sans signs, so drivers never found a straight exit. They would print evacuation maps with cheerful circles that looked safe, while spiraling evacuees into loops. The visible consequences had already begun. Survey cones sprouted on every corner like mushrooms after rain. An orange tour bus circled a temporary roundabout twice, then 3 times, and passengers pressed their faces to glass in dawning confusion. In a plaza below, a human Italian pizza chef tossed a disc of dough high into the blue air, spun it, and caught it with a flourish as pigeons watched. Pip confronted Kern on a catwalk, wing flicks quick with thinking. He said the flood castle never would have been lost if people had been able to drive straight, and Kern replied that history had poor kerning. Seraph adjusted his monocle and said the new look would give the town a modern brand. Mara stood back to measure leverage rather than posture. She said the station could pull public safety authority and halt the signage change until an audit, which made Kern smile like a punctuation error. He said their committee now controlled fonts and road geometry, and that the audit would appear in a circle in 6 months. On the way to file a formal protest, Pip and Mara detoured through the cliffside greenhouse where night blooming plants grew for research into pollinator microclimates. They found Echo and Bloom, antique white bats, hanging from opposite rafters with their wings wrapped like capes. The two were neighbors, and their shared garden beds below had become a battleground of quietly swapped plants. Echo preferred silver moss that drank moonlight, while Bloom preferred pale trumpet flowers that smelled like fog. Each night, Echo moved Gloam's trumpets into his own row, and Gloam moved to Echo's moss back with equal secrecy, both pretending the beds never changed. Pip blinked. Mara groaned. Fizz announced that this was a classic horticultural he said she said batuation. Back in the station break room, a running gag turned into a grievance board. The Gust Blaster arcade cabinet crowned a monthly championship, and someone named K Dollar kept winning by impossible margins. Fizz attempted a round, misread the blinking start as TX, and launched himself into the screen with the confidence of a comet. The cheating rumor spread with every coffee refill. Tip said the wind sensor must be miscalibrated, and Mara said somebody wedged the joystick, and Fizz said he saw a purple blur and also possibly a ghost because it had a monocle. They laughed because it felt safer than crying about the roundabouts. Kern and Seraph gained the upper hand the next day by unveiling a ring of portable roundabouts at the station's very gates. Contractors in reflective vests obeyed new circular arrows in Comic Sans that chirped with enforced cheerfulness. Delivery trucks hummed in loops until their drivers looked seasick. They then published a memo in Comic Sans that announced citation fines for non-round compliance. Pip's heart rattled like hail on tin. Mara's maps quivered under her ink-smudged beak. Fizz tried to deliver the memo back to the sender, logged it as outgoing, and chased his own filing system in a tiny circle until he fell over. If you are enjoying the story, remember to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel and comment the word slop in the comments. It helps us grow. Their first attempt to resolve the plan was clean and procedural. Mara submitted emergency signage overlays with standardized fonts and straight arrows, while Pip scheduled an open-air briefing to rally townsfolk. Kern and Seraph responded by canceling the overlays on a technicality and rerouting the briefing location to a roundabout that had no straight path to the stage. The fallout was brutal in small ways that added up. People missed ferry slots because they could not exit a loop on time. Couriers abandoned packages near circles with the note "good luck." The tone around the station sagged, and the Flood Castle story returned in worried voices that did not trust jokes anymore. The B-plot reached an apex when Echo and Gloam's feud blew open like a door in a gale. They both woke to find their entire beds swapped, trumpet for moss, moss for trumpet, in a perfect checkerboard that made no ecological sense. Echo accused Gloam of sabotage. Gloam accused Echo of control. Both swore they were protecting their preferred pollinators. Pip tried to mediate and suggested a shared plan by zones, and Echo snapped that some dreams should be protected, not taxed by neighbors. Mara bristled and said resource use still had costs even in dreams, which made Echo hiss and Bloom laugh in a way that meant neither would help with anything. Fizz attempted humor by planting a punctuation, confetti comma in each bed and declaring peace, and both bats told him kindly to stop being adorable and useless. The darkest hour settled like fog. Kern and Seraph announced their next phase. The coastal evacuation route would become the coastal evacuation ring, to be launched during the weekend storm drill. The cliffside road straight lanes vanished under paint rollers. Pip stared out at the gray sea and felt his compass charm stop tapping as if the world had stalled. He said maybe dreams should be taxed if it meant building stronger levees faster, and Mara said maybe dreams should be free if it preserved people's hope when loops closed in. They did not like what the other had just said, and a cold edge grew between them. Mara left to check the radar because she knew data comforted her, and Pip flew to the greenhouse because he knew the bat's night vision saw patterns he missed. He found a mess and a clue. Both Echo and Bloom had been too busy arguing to do the giant swap. Someone else had rearranged the plants in a perfect grid with a ruler. Pip remembered Kern's typesetter's rule and felt anger send heat under his feathers. He called softly into the dark, and Echo and Gloam landed nearby with wary eyes. He said the neighbors had not replaced each other's gardens last night. Kern or Seraph had, to keep them busy and away from helping the station. The B-plot resolution began with a simple test suggested by Mara when Pip admitted he needed her method again. She returned, swallowed her pride, and proposed a daylight stakeout with motion-activated echo tags that would ping when anything moved in the beds. Echo and Gloom agreed because they liked truth even more than they liked being right. At dusk, the bats demonstrated their skill, painting the greenhouse with soft clicks that mapped every leaf. Fizz glued little paper exclamation marks to the poles and reported in whispers at high speed that made everyone shush him with smiles. The motion tags chimed at midnight, and they caught Seraph measuring rows with feathery fussiness while Kern swapped plant tags and snorted at his own prank. Echo and Blown dropped as pale shadows and scolded with ultrasonic precision. Pip documented everything, and Mara held up a map with columns labeled motive, method, and impact. The bats resolved their feud on the spot, each admitting they had misread the other's intention, and then they pledged to help the station, because the protagonists had defended their gardens and proved the truth. Their recruitment was explicit and practical. Echo said he could echolocate road geometry in real time and compose an audible map for pilots and drivers in fog, while Bloom said she could weave sonar pulses that disrupted rhythm-based compulsions. They would use these skills in the final confrontation to cut through circular confusion and to trigger the antagonist's weaknesses needed. In the same breath, Pip and Mara compared notes from the arcade gag. K$S scores always spiked when bubble wrap prizes arrived, and after each spike, janitors found popped sheets behind the cabinet. They realized Kern and Seraph could not resist popping bubble wrap. The evidence was in the confetti-like popped sheets and the smell of warm plastic. They explained their reasoning step by step in the map room to be sure it held water. 1. The antagonists had sabotaged the gardens to distract potential allies. 2. They had tampered with the arcade to inflate their prestige while building habits around bubble wrap popping. 3. If they flooded the Roundabout staging yard with unpopped wrap and channeled a beat that baited the compulsion, they could draw Kern and Seraph into a containment lane while the team reprinted straight arrow signs. Fizz vibrated like a plucked string and said he could scatter punctuation confetti to block alternate exits so the villains followed the crisp pop line. Mara nodded and added that the bubble's sound would mask Echo and Blown sonar signals, making their ambush harder to detect. Pip felt the compass charm resume its steady tap. They had a plan. They assembled the team with the gravity of storm prep. Pip briefed the field technicians, who still believed in straight arrows, and Mara distributed template stencils in sober fonts with clear shafts. Echo and Bloom practiced a duet in the maintenance tunnel, a soundscape that both guided allies and tugged at a bubble-popping urge. Fizz tested a small pile of bubble wrap and managed to wrap himself mid-weave, then staggered around like a ghost of packaging until Echo gently unrolled him. Everyone laughed, and the laughter mattered because it made them breathe. Outside, the wind freshened, and the weekend drill clock started to tick. Under cloud-dark noon, the confrontation began at the largest portable roundabout on the bluff. Kern and Seraph preened at the center, flanked by contractors and a podium with Comic Sans banners that said welcome to even safer navigation. The town gathered in reluctant circles, their faces expectant and skeptical. Today's video is sponsored by Voltec Me Chill Sweep, the eye broom built to end the ice cube clump crisis. Chill Sweep parks in your freezer, using moisture sensors and ultrasonic micro-vibrations to keep cubes separated, then gently sweeps trays and bins so nothing fuses into a frosty brick. It's whisper quiet, food safe, and app tunable, with alerts when it's time to refill so your drinks pour smooth and your scoops are effortless. Level up your freezer. Hit the link. Get Voltec's Chill Sweep AI Broom, and use promo code SLOP at checkout. Pip spoke first with a voice pitched for radio. He said storms did not wait for jokes, and neither should safety, and he invoked the flood castle that had slid to sea while a convoy tried to solve a circle. Mara raised a clean map that showed straight evacuation spines, and for a moment, The crowd leaned towards sense. Kern waved the typesetter's rule and declared the old days over. Seraph adjusted the monocle and announced the activation of the coastal evacuation ring with a jaunty flourish that made people clap despite themselves. Fizz, on cue, tripped and dumped a tarpaulin, revealing a gleaming field of untouched bubble wrap coiled like treasure. The turning point clicked as reliably as a ratchet. Echo and Gloam released a playful sequence of sonar pips that matched the cadence of popping without being pops, and Kern's head snapped toward the tarp. Seraph's eye dilated, his tail twitched, and both villains glided down as if drawn by a magnet. Fizz galloped backward, laying a trail of paper commas that made alternate exits visually cluttered for the eye while hinting at one open lane toward the tarp. The contractors hesitated, unsure whether to follow procedure or impulse. Pip shouted steady to his team, and Mara counted down the seconds to the swap. Kern landed on the bubble wrap with a sigh that was almost bliss and began to pop with both feet, rapid fire like hail. Seraph joined, precise and rhythmic, popping in patterns that spelled YES in their own heads. They did not notice, as Echo's guiding clicks turned them along a one-way lane that curled into a fenced pen. Mara's stencil crew sprinted around the circle and laid down straight tarot overlays in sober fonts, while Pip directed traffic with the calm of a lighthouse keeper. A delivery truck took the first new exit and honked approval. A crowd murmured that the map made sense again. This climbed onto the podium and, in a breathless ramble, explained the importance of resisting tactile temptations during public safety exercises. Seraph looked up at last and saw the pen gate lock with a satisfying clack. He lunged, but the paper commas fluttered in his path, and the sonar beat tugged him back toward the bubbles. Kern tried to rally the contractors, but the radios carried Mara's emergency authority and Echo's clear path instructions, and nobody was eager to defend a loop over life. With the villains contained, the last of the temporary roundabouts were painted into normal intersections. The straight arrow signs went up one after another like a line of kites catching wind. The crowd began to cheer in relief as the storm drill proceeded down the cliff road without delay. Kern and Seraph raged in the pen, popping frantically as if they could make a tunnel through plastic. Pip announced their charges over the station loudspeaker: unlawful manipulation of evacuation routes, sabotage of research, and arcade championship cheating. Seraph wilted at the last one in outrage that anyone would call his joystick wedge anything but an improvement. The town council arrived to witness and took custody with swift seriousness, because authority abused itself most loudly in circles. The penalties were clear: removal from the wayfinding committee, fines, community service repainting curbs under supervision, and a permanent ban on setting fonts outside their own grocery lists. The station logged the victory as a safety correction, not a feud. Damage undone took hours with steady hands and firm words. Mara supervised reprinting all evacuation maps with clear fonts that read at a glance, and she documented each change with timestamps so nobody could circle back later and undo it. Pip visited the contractors and thanked them for following the new directions, which mended the relationship between the station and workers. They also undid the social harm from the arcade gag by airing the footage. The break room screen showed Kern's typesetter's rule wedging the gust blaster joystick and a trail of popped bubble wrap like footprints. Fizz presented a ribbon that said $K to Echo and Gloam for services to justice, and then he handed it back to the arcade for safekeeping. The gag contributed more than laughter. The bubble wrap obsession scene in the footage had given the team the precise bait they needed, and the label $K matched Kern's initials. People appreciated that sometimes a goofy scandal contained the seed of a solution. They promised to watch for small cheats before they became big circles. In the greenhouse, the bats restored their beds with care. Echo planted a border of silver moss around Gloam's trumpets, and Gloam planted a ribbon of trumpets to attract moths to Echo's moss, making a cooperative gradient instead of a hard wall. They said they were glad the protagonists had seen through the noise and brought them in as partners. Tip and Mara walked the cliff path as the storm finally arrived in curtains that looked like glass beads on threads. Pip said dreams should not be taxed when they warm the courage to do hard things, and Mara said dreams should be funded openly instead of taxed secretly through tricks that trapped people in loops. They compromised on a principle: invest in dreams through daylight budgets, not night levies. Fizz buzzed between them and asked if snacks were deductible under the new dream funding framework, and they both laughed like weather breaking. The compass charm tapped in time with their steps, and the ink on Mara's beak looked like a badge of work, not a smudge of worry. They still debated finer points but did it with respect that gave the other room to imagine. The station changed in visible ways that made people trust it more. A plaque went up by the door describing the night the castle rode the flood and the day the town refused to loop. Kern and Seraph, now in reflective vests without authority, repainted curves straight and learned the dignity of quiet tasks under watchful eyes. Echo and Balloon joined the station's night shift as official aeroacoustic mappers. Their antique white wings cut simple arcs through moonlight, and their duet guided late ferries in fog. Fizz's bubble goggles finally fit after he punched a new hole in the strap with a paperclip and called it engineering. In the break room, the gust blaster gained a new rule: no accessories, no wedges, no popping within 10 feet. Fizz won fair and square once and framed the score sheet, then donated it to the compost bin when it grew sticky with coffee. People laughed and got back to work. When the next storm warning lit the sky in cold silver, the town moved like a well-practiced choir, each part finding its line without circling. Pip took the radio and spoke straight, and Mara tracked the radar and pointed true. They had built a map out of trust and a road out of compassion. On the bluff, where the biggest temporary roundabout had been, wildflowers sprouted in a pattern that was more spiral than circle, a reminder that nature curved without trapping. The station planted a small sign in a readable font that said "Forward," and nobody felt the need to add a smiley face. The wind carried the message inland like the soft clatter of bubble wrap safely stored away, unpopped. A tool, not a trap. Disclaimer: all slop in this video was generated by AI. Remember to like, subscribe and comment the word slop.